Well, good morning and welcome to our first interview we have done in quite a while. We had a great run of interviews. Go back and find we've done several, I'd probably say 15 to 20 interviews. But one of the very first ones we did was a guy named Matt Aycock, and he is a real estate attorney here in the DFW area. Pratt Aycock is his firm, and he specializes in all things real estate law, litigation, and the complicated stuff, the stuff that you do not want to handle yourself. And he's actually been on one other time, episode 24. So go back and check out episode 24 when we kind of get into how Matt got started and some of the basics of his career. But then he actually, that was the one interview I did not take part of. I was in New York, and Tavis was in charge of that one. So if you want to hear Tavis running an interview, uh, go to episode 24. You did a great job. So, but Matt, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Sure. I'm happy to be here.
So one of the reasons your name came up recently is I know, you and Tavis go way back, and Tavis has this goal of flipping 20 houses this year. He's really kicked up the volume, and I know you've called him, and Tavis said, "Hey, Matt called today." And he's just making sure I'm doing my numbers right. He's checking in on me because he's seeing some stuff on his side of the desk that's making him a little nervous about values coming up. So why don't you take us into what you look at every day, what you're seeing, and those conversations with you and Tavis that maybe people that are out there investing need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean the big thing is that when you have a rising value market to where properties are appreciating, it makes bad flippers like someone that maybe gets a bad estimate or doesn't calculate their costs and everything right. It gives them a little bit more forgiveness, so they still won't lose when they sell it. And so some people are overconfident whenever they're taking properties under contract, and they're not factoring in the fact that these things aren't flying off the market and your holding costs are rather expensive. We're seeing days on market, rise pretty much across the whole country. So, I mean, that's just going to continue, I think, for most of the rest of this year, potentially into next year as well. And a lot of it comes down to people don't have the money to buy a house. It's not just rates. I know everybody's like pushing rates, and that is a piece of it. But most people are really poor right now, and it didn't matter who got elected. I mean, I was saying this time last year that 2025 is going to be really hard on a lot of people, and the reason is we started seeing last year highest rates of personal debt in 20 years, and then we started seeing lowest amounts of personal savings the last 20 years, and that all kind of came to light last year. And so when you see those indicators, typically what follows is a large compression on the real estate market because nobody has the cash to go out and buy. They don't have the room in their monthly budget to buy, and then of course there's a few things I want to talk about today that I think are going to put even more pressure on that, for the next few months. But that with those types of things creates opportunities, and so right now, people that are flipping, they just need to watch their numbers. They need to make sure that they're getting their properties for the right price, and really paying attention to how they're budgeting for repairs and things of that nature. It's not as easy as it was. Yeah,
Definitely. So now all of those are great indicators, and the stuff that we've kind of seen. And I watch On the Market, or listen to On the Market, which is an economic real estate podcast put out by Bigger Pockets. And they've touched on some of these KPIs with the, household debt, debt to income, all those types of things, which you would like to think that on the consumer side, your banks are going to do a good job of kind of keeping you reasonable. But once you're in, and especially in Texas, what we found too is that, property taxes keep going up, insurance policies keep going up. And so even if you locked in a year or two ago and you were doing okay, those people, I think, are also starting to get strangled a little bit on their monthly payment because we see the policies just skyrocketing. So I know that you had mentioned to Tavis. So do you look at a good bit? Do you deal with foreclosures for investors, or how do you interact with the foreclosure market?
So, my background before I started my own practice was I worked for Bank of America in the default servicing section. I kind of was a large part of the title arm, so land safe, national default. So I was very involved there, and so I just kind of cut my teeth on the foreclosure side before going on my own. once you're in it, you kind of stay in it. I've done a lot of foreclosure work right now. We have a number of clients. Most of them that we handle are going to be your hard money or private money foreclosures. The big banks, they typically use the big firms, but as they get overflow because they get too busy, some of that trickles down to us as well, because we are approved to do them for the bigger banks. So, but yeah, we do a tremendous amount of foreclosure work, and we've picked up tremendously in that space, and we don't see it going down. Every month it seems to tick up more and more. There's also some big things on the horizon in the FHA market. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. I know I mentioned it to Tavis, but they're not talking about it a lot. But essentially, and I was kind of surprised to learn this, during COVID, they made it to where you didn't have to make payments if you had an FHA loan. They couldn't foreclose on you. And that makes sense. If you're not letting people work, no big deal. That's been getting extended every year, and that sunsets the end of this month. And so you're going to have a tremendous number of people that have not been paying a mortgage since 2020, 2021, that all of a sudden now have to pay their mortgage. And I don't care how well you're doing financially, a $2,000 to $3,000 hit to your monthly budget, most people can't afford. So you're gonna see a tremendous amount of defaults in that space. And I would assume it's usually 120 days. I would assume that means that it'll start May. You'll count out 120 days, and that's when you'll start seeing a lot of those foreclosures happen.
So is there a place to see, can you see lists that FHA holds? Or how would you know homes to watch? Or, I mean, I know there's pre-foreclosure lists, but is there a way for someone like Tavis that's looking to buy, not that you want to always prey on people, but I mean, part of buying distressed properties is someone's distressed. Maybe it's a death, maybe it's a divorce, but maybe it's a pending foreclosure. So if you're an investor and you're wanting to maybe find these houses that could potentially be good value, how would you go about looking for those? Do you know?
Yeah, and so one thing to keep in mind is that if you're, anybody can buy it at the auction, right? That's a possibility. So the foreclosure lists are valuable for that. But the problem is a lot of times when you get the foreclosure list, it may be too late. Those, at that point in time, there may be too many people trying to knock on their doors or whatever. So it's harder to compete. But the other aspect of it is you can't buy these typically after the foreclosure sale. They will change up the numbers on REO, but typically it has to be an owner occupied after the foreclosure sale, at least for 60, 90 days or whatever before they'll let investors, bid on them. But if you want to get them early, a lot of times the credit bureaus, you might be able to pull leads from that source, give you a good source. With all FHA deals, you can tell by looking at the actual filed deed of trust, and you can know it's actually an FHA loan because it'll have Secretary of Housing and Urban Development will be the trustee on it typically. So those are some ways to do it, through title searches and whatnot. But all in all, you're going to be looking at, a certain price point because there's FHA limits. And so houses that, were acquired around that price point, you can kind of assume that it would be FHA, and then you just drill down and find out the answer. But there are going to be a tremendous number of those that do go into default. I think some strategic marketing could land some pretty good opportunities, not just on the investor side, but the retail side, because people don't mention this enough, but an FHA loan is a qualified assumable. So, you've got like 3.5 interest rate loans out there. And now from my understanding, you can't assume it as a non-owner occupant, but I think you do have to treat it as your homestead. But somebody looking to pick up a new home, that might be a good option for them. So for real estate agents, that would be a great source of business as well.
And Matt, speaking of that, and back in the day, when we saw this same type of thing happen, right, going back to 2007, 8, 9, the stuff we were seeing a lot was actually making its way back to MLS, right, through process of REO, which is real estate owned, right, meaning that the bank buys it back. Do you see that happening again because of the type of equity spreads that are in these properties? Do you see that happening where the bank
That
takes these on and takes the burden on to try to sell the property again? Or do you think that was driven mainly back then just because people couldn't qualify for loans? Um, and they were taking that inventory on versus being able to move it.
Yeah, I think we could see some similarities, like so, especially with like FHA. There's so little money down typically, and while they have appreciated, if they haven't been making payments, that could outweigh that appreciation. So there could be some that are underwater, even if they had
Sure.
appreciated quite a bit. So that's kind of a fear there. With conventional, it's much less likely, because they usually started off at least 10% equity. And with appreciation, that's probably not going to put them in that big of a bond. But you could see some. I mean, it depends on if we have like a substantial shift, what and going back to when you and I started in the business, and really when we kind of met, that a lot of people were like, "This is the worst time to get into the business." It's actually the best time to get into it. You make more money during that time than any other. But I was surprised how many the bank did take back when it was the 07, 08 collapse in this area, because we never saw drastic appreciation in DFW back then leading up to
Right.
that point. What makes me a little fearful is we have seen so much drastic appreciation here in DFW, and that's usually indicative of what you can predict will be total inventory of REO takebacks. So that's the one thing that's kind of confusing to me is we had so much then, and we didn't have much appreciation. So
Right.
I'm worried about that aspect. We could see a lot more.
And the other thing I was going to say is, and this is funny because I think everybody was trying to get an opportunity, and I can't remember, did we have to get certified or take a class or something to be able to bid on HUD properties? But it was through their website, right? And I know there was a time period, it was 7 or 10 days or something that they would put it out to public, or it might have been longer. You mentioned earlier something about 60 days or 90 days, but I don't remember it being that long. I remember it being a couple weeks maybe before an investor could actually bid on the property, because they gave the consumer first dibs on it through their website. But you would go on and you would kind of make a blind bid. It was almost like they had their, I'm sure now the technology would be much better than it was back then. But, because that was 15 years ago, and it was a little bit of a dinosaur even then to bid on a property. But any talks of that? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, so they were doing that because of the massive amount of inventory that they had to move. Yeah, and so when you have that much inventory, you've got to create, a bid system that allows people to bid in bulk, and so you can move the assets, and that's what they were doing. And so those registrations was really just to make sure that people were qualified bidders, so they didn't tie up assets, with somebody that just couldn't perform. Right now, I haven't seen too much in that space because it's not as big of a deal right now. But I would assume that we'll use a similar approach.
And you're thinking the stuff that we're going to see, or the stuff that's in default, the stuff that originated probably somewhere between the time of 2015 and 2020, right? Originated during that time period. So the massive appreciation we've seen obviously was post COVID, but COVID was the trickle down effect, right? Service industries, several different industries obviously were affected heavily by COVID, without human interaction, and not being able to potentially work from home. Like I said, service industry people, and you get into it was wild. Tabitha and I looked at back in the day, movie theaters, And it was like,
Yeah.
man, it's such a great investment. You know, you can't go wrong with
Yeah.
movie theater. And then COVID happens. It was like, oh, there you
Mhm.
go.
You can go
And
wrong
now
with
it's
movie
like
theaters.
they're struggling, right, to make a comeback because you've got all these,
Yeah, I used to.
all this technology now to watch a movie from your home pretty quickly. Now you don't have to wait for it to season.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spinoff with Netflix and all these proprietary brands that have made their own places, But I mean, you do miss the popcorn and the atmosphere of the movie
Right.
theater. So
Yeah, I took my youngest to watch the Minecraft movie,
Oh
and
my
it was
gosh.
pretty interesting. The popcorn, that was actually fun. I enjoyed it.
Was it as
Really?
crazy as it looks online? Because
It
is it
was
like
not.
every time that they do that, or is
I
it?
don't know. I mean, hey, it was loud in there. I mean,
Was
I'd
it?
say it was pretty loud. It wasn't as crazy as some of the videos I've seen, but it was very entertaining.
Wow.
I was glad we went. I had a good time.
Yeah, I think it does look like it would be a good time. But I did notice the other day that Studio Movie Grill had taken it off their list. So I think some
Yeah.
theaters
Oh,
are like,
really? It was
no
too much of a
thanks.
cleanup, and
Yeah.
just
It
people
just
are acting rowdy.
yeah,
Just
just
embrace
a
it,
complete mess.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
well, going back to so I was listening to on the market the economic podcast from Bigger Pockets yesterday. They were predicting they think if we do have a pullback, because they're still how the tariffs are going to play into consumer buying habits, that sort of thing. Are we going to have a slight recession? They do think that from a technical recession it's possible, but then once the news grabs onto that, starts putting it out there that hey, we're in a recession, people start acting like they're in a recession. They were talking about possibly a 2 to 3% pullback on prices, not a huge crash. But even here, let's say our average price is 400, just for easy math. A 3% pullback would be 12 grand. Tavis, normally whenever we're underwriting deals for Tavis to buy, we're trying to go between $40,000 and $50,000 profit on the front end. So if we had a pullback, it should absorb that if you're having to sit for longer, but then you also have longer carrying costs and that sort of thing. So do you ever look at any of those numbers? Do you watch that sort of thing? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I think that recession is like when you look at the terms recession and depression, I don't think that that's always a good indicator, or as good of an indicator as it's touted as being. I've always just focused heavily on those two numbers of personal savings and personal debt. And I was one of the people that was called an idiot whenever I was saying, hey, this whole thing's going to collapse in 07, 08. Unfortunately, I didn't have any money then, still in law school. I was just broke, or right out of law school, I guess. But otherwise, I would have been able to retire. But yeah, it was that's the two key indicators. Because if people are broke, it doesn't matter how good the stock market's doing. They don't have any money, and that's really what it comes down to. And so I always kind of hesitate to watch them tout how good the market's doing, because the last couple of years the stock market's been doing great. So everybody says the economy's wonderful. But when you go out and you talk to people, they're like, yeah, I can barely afford groceries.
Right.
I'm sorry. The stock market does not matter at all if you can't eat. And that's a big problem with a lot of places, is they talk about that too much. And while that's important, it's not the key indicator. I don't think that is a reasonable expectation of what will happen with price erosion. I would think it would be much, much higher than that. I would not be surprised if we saw 10 to 15% price erosion. It might be very temporary, but I don't see how it can't be that high. I mean, FHA portfolio alone, we're looking at, they're predicting about a 13.5% default rate. If that happens, that's over 1 million homes right there. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's nationwide, but you can't have that type of impact and it not affect prices. Not to mention people can't buy right now. First time, a long time I'm seeing homes have been on the market for way more than 6 months. I mean, think about it. Like 2 years ago, that never happened.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So I see prices coming down.
And I think part of that has to do with, the sellers. If they've been on the market that long, obviously they're in a position where they have to sell. and they didn't market it right. They didn't do the right things, obviously, to get it sold quicker, whatever it is, whether it was a professional recommendation or it was the buyer or the seller steering, their direction. And so many people, if they're not in the industry, have this, have this, like quick memory loss, so to where they feel like their neighbor just sold for $20,000 over asking, which was now 3 years ago, which is hard to believe, that we're in 2025 and, the crazy, boom we had locally was 22. So 3 years ago, but people think that was yesterday. Like
That's
it's really bizarre when you talk to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, even somebody recently would talk to me about, I think it was Chris Oleg, actually. I posted a property in Carrollton and he goes, oh, I just flipped one over there. And he goes, I got over asking. And I was like, great. And he's like, yeah, same floor plan. So we're talking back and forth. And I said, what'd you sell it for? And he's like, 405. And I'm like, at 450. And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, oh, that's bad. And I was like, I don't see it. Where is it? And he goes, oh, sorry, man. That was it was actually back in 23, but I thought it was, a few months ago. And I'm like, oh, jeez, thank God, like, don't tell me that, because he's like, yeah, I was over asking that. And I'm like, oh no. But so Matt, what are you seeing? Obviously you're dealing with foreclosures from a lot of private money, hard money stuff that you're foreclosing on. You talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing went wrong with those scenarios. Was it lack of experience on some of these borrowers? Because I know the lenders have been tightening up, and typically, I mean, the season of these loans that private money and hard money do are mostly like 6-month loans, right? I mean, maybe some could be a year, but I know a lot of them have been 6 months. So what are you seeing went wrong? And like, what are you seeing like the preventative maintenance is? If you were to coach one of these people you're foreclosing on, what would be some of the words of wisdom you would coach back? Or maybe it's a conversation with the lender as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you. I mean, a lot of it is they were successful, because it was easy, because markets were going up, right? So it kind of covered up their mistakes in previous deals. Or another common one that we see a lot is someone they've done the lipstick, but they've never done anything substantive, and then they try to do something substantive, and it's a whole lot bigger of a project than they realized. And so
Ashton knows about that.
I've been there. Yeah.
And that one's where it's a real problem. Like, and so I always tell, like, if an investor comes to me wanting advice, I always tell them, look, if you haven't taken on a project where you've done something specifically like what you're trying to do, find someone that has, and just learn from that. Like, ask them questions. I was like, most of you guys help each other out. You'll answer questions, help each other out, because there's enough to go around for everybody to make money. And I'm like, but if you don't do that, those surprises can get very expensive. And so that's a big one. And that's all the time. That's not just right now. That's literally all the time. The other one, though, is just days on market. It's really killing these guys because, the fixed portion, prior to the flip, it should take 4 months and then you should sell in 2. That's kind of what most people are thinking when they do that 6-month loan. Well, we're seeing it take longer than that. And that's where we're running into issues as well. And you don't have to go too many months of making those interest only payments to where you're finally like, well, dude, if I sell it now, I'm not going to make anything, So,
yeah, those interest only the hard money payments add up real fast.
They do.
So is that where you're seeing like these deals get pinched and they can't make the interest only payments anymore? And now it's like, because we've talked about this before. In a perfect world, if all the ducks are in line, then the lender, it would benefit the lender just to do an extension, correct?
Yeah, and I can tell you this: all the lenders I work with, if you communicate with them, they'll work with you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't. I don't know any lender that won't, because they don't want to own the property. You know, I
Right.
hear,
They don't
hear
want that headache.
yeah, I heard all the time in 07, 08, the bank's still in my house because, you know, dude, they don't want your house. Like, it's not the business they're in. And so, yeah, they'll work with you. And a lot of times it's, you know, we start the process and then they work something out, you know,
Well,
because, you know.
and a caveat to that, I don't know if it's any different in the hard money side of it. But I know from, you know, back in the day and, you know, George Roddy and I going back and understanding the depth to, you know, foreclosures that let's say that the bank is owed, you know, $250,000 is what's owed on it. And then you got another $30,000 in attorney fees, right? So let's say it's 280. And let's say the property sells at auction for 350,000, right?
Right.
There's a yield of $70,000 that they made on that property. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that $70,000 goes to the trustee, but it's not going back to the original lien holder immediately, right? Like there's a process in that money's kind of tied up in limbo, correct?
So what we do is, if when we foreclose, the money comes to us because we're the trustee, and so
you as the attorney,
and so we pay the lender off. Well, honestly, first we pay ourselves because, you know, why not? Then we pay the lender off. If there's any money left over, we make a determination if there's any subordinate liens. If they are, we start paying them in a waterfall fashion from second, third, fourth, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
If we run
that
out
could be second mortgage, that could be
correct.
HOA, that could be
correct
anything like that, right?
Yep. And then once everybody's paid, if there's any money left over, that goes to the borrower.
Right.
The bank cannot get a windfall from a foreclosure.
Yeah.
So
that's just something for everyone to listen to. It, you know, any of our audience out there, because I think that's a misconception that took place in 08, 09, and even, you know, over the recent years. You know, people have that misconception.
Right.
You know, but it is from a borrower standpoint, it's challenging to get that back, isn't it?
Well, a lot of times what happens, and the reason why it's quote unquote challenging, is the same person that just foreclosed on you is reaching out to you. And so they just don't want to take the calls or anything. And they think that we're, you know, now if they hired an attorney throughout the process or whatever, and we talk to them, that is normally kind of easy to get them the money. But yeah, like, I mean, we've had people that it's taken months to get them to just respond. And it's like, we have money for you, you know?
Yeah. So what are you seeing with these hard money and private guys once they're foreclosing, getting this property back? Then what? Are they putting it back out to the field, or are they taking it on as inventory themselves? To, you know, what are you seeing happening?
So it depends. You know, some of them, they actually, you know, did considerable amount of fix and flip work, and so they may finish it and sell it, or they may just convert it to a rental. I've seen a lot of them do that. But then there's some guys that just routinely just push it out and let somebody else pick it up, run with it. You know, I'd say probably the majority push it back out.
Yeah. We've seen a few of those. We're starting to see that.
Yeah. We've been walking
the numbers usually are not very good at all.
Well, and the hard part from our perspective at that point is, you don't really know the quality of work that was done. You see a bunch of demo and you see a bunch of work, but you have no idea who did it, what quality, where they started, where they stopped. So it's just really, you almost have to go back and at least peel the onion a little bit further back and start where you're comfortable with it. So it's not this, because a lot of times when they're marketed, like, hey, this is already half demoed and they've already done, don't worry, they've already done the plumbing. It's like, okay, well, you don't really know about that. But the other thing too, from an investor side, I feel like, Tavis, you've passed up on several deals, and I think this is also where newbies can get in trouble. One, you have a lot of your name brand wholesale companies that are out there, that they're marketing companies that happen to be in real estate, and they find investors. So be careful with that. But the deals that look tempting are the kind of the weird ones. the ones that are on a weird corner or backed up to something. And there's a reason that seasoned investors are passing on that, because you're definitely not the first. There's a chance that you're the only random investor that got called by this person, but chances are several people who know what they're talking about have gone through that house and for one reason or another have passed on that. And so right now, like, I think this is the time, like slam dunk type deals. Like, hey, I can't bank on being creative and I'm going to change this. And by the time we're done, it's going to be really, no, I think you do bread and butter, very slam dunk type deals where your numbers for sure work. And you're not saying if this happens, then we'll be okay. Cause that's really where you're going to get in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like that one in Prestonwood you're talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, we went
weird
and looked,
floor plan, busy street, across from an apartment building.
Yep.
You know,
exactly.
Like all of the things that, you know, if you have experience in this business, you know, those are the things that cause you to have extended days on market on the backside.
Yeah.
And most likely going to sell at a discount compared to what your neighbor sold for behind you, you know, or doesn't have those issues.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Matt, I got a couple. I got a question about a house that Tavis and I were standing in front of the other day. We've talked about it. It was just a rat infested house. Tavis gave you a call. And so this kind of goes into the another topic I wanted to touch on here is two things: very encumbered title or very messy title or whatever. And I'd like to know from your perspective, like if you're an investor and you wanted to track some of those down and maybe try to figure out if you can figure out these problems and you can get a property that's hard for other people to get. But we were specifically in front of a house. I think there was 4 family members there. It seemed like there was more behind the scenes. One family member had taken a phone call, had committed to a wholesaler, signed something at $10 option fee for a 120-day option. She didn't really have full legal
Zero earnest money.
No earnest money. She didn't really have full legal authority to sign that, but they wanted out. So can we just kind of talk from your perspective and your conversation with Tavis? Can we kind of talk through that? And then I'd like to just talk about messy title in general, and as an investor, how you would go about figuring some of those things out.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of a big question, but as far as finding messy title deals, if that's your thing, you need to figure out how to fix them yourself. And when I say fix them yourself, at least be able to ask the correct questions. Because if you can't, it's going to get cost prohibitive most of the time.
If I'm calling you every time I find an heir that's dead and one that lives in Colorado that doesn't talk to the guy in Texas, if I call you to fix that, there's not going to be a lot of margin on the backside to make it worth my while. Is that what you're saying?
It could get expensive. Yeah. And there's some things you can't legally do as a non-attorney, but you'll know what those are if you learn how to fix title. It's called curative, or curing title. And there's a couple of guys out there that do a really good job of it and know a lot. And then they know when to come to me or some other attorney to do a particular action. Probably the best place to find these deals, it would be to make relationships with escrow officers, because the escrow officers, they get deals all the time that people can't figure out how to close, or because nobody wants to pay for an attorney, or and title doesn't have a duty to go out and fix all this stuff at their expense. So they just can't close them. Those are the kind of deals you want, and so I used to, when I was in the title business, that was one of the things that we would market, is that, if your solution can't figure out how to close it, bring it to us, we'll figure it out. And that's how I capture a lot of investor business. But I can't remember all the specifics on this particular deal, but essentially that wholesaler, in my opinion, shouldn't have done what they did necessarily. I also have thoughts on what happens if someone signs a contract and they're not the 100% owner of the property. There's a lot of things that can happen there. For instance, if Tavis and I buy a house together and he turns around and tries to sell it without my knowledge, if I don't sign off on stuff, do I lose my interest? And the answer to that is no. And so that investor, what they may have is like, let's say there's 5 people in title, they may have a contract to purchase 20% interest in the property. So that's one thought. The other thought is, well, what if Tavis, in my example, represented to that buyer, hey, I own 100% of this. Okay. Well, in that instance, they may have a lawsuit against Tavis to force him to acquire the remaining 50% from me. But neither of those scenarios are actually good scenarios, because that wholesaler made a huge mistake by not at least trying to find out who can sign this contract. I think most people realize that there's a husband and wife. You get both to sign the contract. I mean, most people get that concept, but they don't think about it when it's like, oh yeah, this one son's taking care of everything. We got him to sign it. I'm like, well, what about his 3 siblings? So it makes it very difficult to enforce those contracts. So if you get the one to sign it, once you discover there's more, you should amend that contract very quickly to add them as sellers. And I think that the contract that wholesaler had could be disputed because he didn't have enough people sign it. Not to mention $10 for 120-day option is kind of,
it was sketchy,
unconscionable.
Yeah. If
well,
nothing
that was,
else, it
and
was
that
sketchy.
was the sad thing is, I think the seller, the primary seller, who was, on title or notice with tax notices, whatever, however they found her, was unaware of the details, of the deal. And she didn't know. She obviously very, very naive to how real estate works and how title works. And so, the other parties weren't aware until they tried to get clear title and it came up. So that's when it threw everything. But, she was just trying to get it, sold, deal with the estate, and didn't know. And then, as far as understanding the contract, didn't hire an attorney, didn't hire a professional, didn't hire anybody with any kind of real estate knowledge to overlook the contract and say yay or nay, right? And so when my contact got a hold of me, he's like the grandson of the estate. He's reading it, and he had enough knowledge to say, this doesn't look right, but it is a contract. So, I mean, that's where they run into problems because it was there. I think they've then since hired a family friend attorney to write a demand letter. But as far as I know, nothing's happened with that yet. So, I don't think they've responded to that demand letter.
One of the things that I'll say is, I mean, as you know me, I don't do the demand letter thing.
Sure.
You're getting sued or you're not, but the thing for me though is I see wholesalers all the time that lack the understanding that when you put it under contract and you say it's cash, okay, that doesn't mean that you have to pay cash, but it means you have to be capable of paying cash. And so a lot of the time they do that and they're not saying cash or borrowed funds, which is what they should be doing. And so they're misrepresenting. So it's a fraudulent act, and you're deceiving that seller into believing that you have the cash to actually buy it when you don't. And if that's the case, then the contract's void.
Right.
And what could happen at some point is somebody may come along and start you got a contract, as a wholesaler with a seller, you got the end buyer, right? Well, then the seller's like, oh, this contract's void, but I'll still sell to that guy and make the delta, and legally there'd probably be nothing that wholesaler could do, at least not successfully.
I know in one of the circles I'm in, one of the groups that I follow, they're real big on, they'll provide proof of funds letters. And is that the reason why they're trying to cover that aspect of the contract of like, hey, I have proof of funds. They have no intention of buying it, but they're still throwing out this idea that technically I could buy it. Is that what they're doing?
Yeah. So just to comment on the proof of funds letters, those can wind you in prison. Just be aware of that. We see a lot of fraudulent ones. I can tell you right now that is a huge FBI thing right now that they're digging into, where people have access to like these websites and stuff that'll generate these fake letters. Yeah, that is a great way to land yourself in
Well,
prison.
we actually
So,
talked about that
yeah.
with
So
with
yeah. So,
an interview here not too long ago. If you remember, somebody
yeah.
that was in our real estate industry.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. In DFW.
Yeah, we brought it
yes.
up on our podcast here, but that was one of the indictments or
Yeah.
claims of issues that was going on.
Yeah. So I strongly discourage that. I mean, it's just so easy to put down in a contract, that you could use hard money lending or whatever. And then also there's nothing wrong with telling the person what you're going to do.
Yeah, I think
I
that's
mean,
the best way to do
Well, I
it.
think
if you're a crappy sales guy, then you shouldn't be in the business anyway.
Yeah.
right.
You know?
If I ever get prompted with that, what I do is I ask my bank, because I use bank funds.
Yeah.
And essentially it is a loan. I do write it as cash, just because I think that the way our contract's written with third-party addendum and stuff, there's just different layers to it that doesn't necessarily coincide with the way that I'm structuring the deal.
Right.
But what I do provide, if they ask me, and I always upfront tell them how I'm structured, but what I do provide is if they ask me for proof of funds, and I'll get my banker to write a letter that basically just says I've got experience with them, done several transactions with them, and basically have the approval to take down the property.
Right.
So they're weird on, well, they're very strategic how they word it too. But it's just showing that, hey, we've done this before. We have the background. We have the backing. Here's the president of the bank, and it doesn't necessarily go into showing a snapshot of a bank account or showing the amount of funds available or any of that, which I've seen that all happen in the past, right? Like I've seen that, especially back in the REO days. There was a tremendous amount of time that there was proof of funds letter that were sent over with like a dollar amount specific to the equation. But like Matt said, if people want to dig into that deep and, rip that apart, they can. and, and that's fraud.
Well, it is as long as you close, it's never going to come out.
Sure.
That's the thing.
Yeah,
Sure.
right.
I guess that's the key, the key indicator.
Right.
Yeah. So going back just real quick, Matt, when you were talking about, I think you brought up a key point, and this is true in all business aspects, especially with what I do and Ash does, and we all do, and you even as an attorney. I think this is key to any business. But you mentioned communication, right? You mentioned lack of communication. So like these deals that you're seeing get foreclosed on, does the borrower just get behind and they just stop communicating, or they just stop answering the phone from the lender when they're saying, hey man, you didn't pay this much interest payment? Or like, yeah, I mean, obviously if they do communicate and explain what's going on in depth, there may not be a solution, right? I mean, obviously everyone wants to try to work together, but
Sure.
what are you seeing? Like, what's the biggest thing that you're seeing on these amount of foreclosures that you're closing on? I mean, are they ugly? Are they all ugly? Or some of them are just, man, we tried everything we possibly do. Sorry, man, you're going to have to foreclose.
Yeah. So when it's the latter and they're communicative and it's just a misread or whatever, in those, they typically go the deed in lieu route. So they sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure.
Okay.
And I have personally seen deals where I've had lenders do a deed in lieu of foreclosure with a particular borrower and then still continue to lend that borrower money because it was just recognized this. Hey, we all made a bad choice here.
Yeah.
Everybody loses. But it just takes being someone that communicates. And what a lot of people don't understand is like, even in the hard money world, they do look at things.
And just to back up, deed in lieu is basically you're voluntarily surrendering the deed, the ownership of the property back to the lender, correct?
Correct.
Without it being forced via foreclosure.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And then without that foreclosure on your record, other hard money lenders are still going to consider you valuable. If there's a deed in lieu out there, they're going to think, okay, well, at least they will work, work with us as opposed to being problematic. The ones that are troubling, and we've got several cases right now that are just being litigated. I don't even understand why. I don't know why they would litigate on these, because inevitably they're gonna lose. I mean, you don't litigate in a foreclosure scenario and then all of a sudden they say, oh, well, tell you what, you don't have to pay this mortgage and you still get to keep the property. I mean, that doesn't happen.
Right.
It just postpones the inevitable. And I think maybe they have it in their head that, they can market to sell the property during that delay.
In the meantime. Yeah.
But what would make more sense is like just work a deal with the lender. And
right.
I mean, the lender would give you more time and pay them instead of some attorney.
Yeah.
But it's not how it works. So.
Got it.
Nice. Well, Matt,
awesome. Any more questions, Ashton?
Yeah, no, you've done great. I mean, you're always a wealth of knowledge. I enjoyed listening to the first episode, and I know we've run into each other a couple of times at the cigar lounge that Tavis frequents. Yeah. He's a frequenter. If you're dressed appropriately, they will not allow you. This is one of the establishments that you have to be dressed appropriately. So
I am a t-shirt guy, especially in summer. And I'm like, I've been over there about to go in, and then I'm like, crap.
Yeah.
So
hey, well, at least they got jackets to fit you.
I know.
Like, I mean, they might be a little big, but I don't think they don't stock my size. So
no.
Yeah.
No,
mine are Ashton's size.
We had a buddy that went in there, and he wanted to be there, so they gave him the jacket. And I mean, he looked way better before.
Are you
the
talking
jacket.
about Ryan?
Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean,
it was
Ryan
up to
looked
his
nice.
elbows, and yeah.
And then they made him wear this stupid like a Masters green jacket. And it just looked so dumb. And like the sleeves were 4 inches short. I'm like, how is this better for your vibe than let this guy sit here in his nice outfit, anyway. But yeah, I've always enjoyed running into you and asking you questions. And you're definitely generous with your time and your knowledge and all that stuff. So
where can they find you, Matt?
Yeah. Tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Facebook's one way. You can text me. I never answer my phone, but you can text me. So my phone 972-342-8188. But like I said, text me. I'm not gonna answer it. So
get into the formal communication.
It's like I answer, if I know. But
yeah.
Are you saying you're not going to answer the text, or you're not going to answer the phone call?
No, I'll answer the text. It's
okay, there you go.
Most phone calls, I just get too many like spam calls, and I'm just tired of them. So I just.
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. It's gotten very, very bizarre these days.
Well, cool, Matt. I appreciate it.
The phone.
We will have our normal weekly podcast coming out. We will edit this one for Matt and put it out in the next week or so. So be looking for that. Follow us on Instagram. Well, of course, if you're listening to this now, that means that you will have known that we put this out. So that's a glitch in the matrix. The glitch in the mental matrix right there. But if you're listening to this, you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all those things. Keep in touch. And we drop a weekly podcast that has the DFW market, the news of the day, and a little bit about the flipping business and real estate business that we're doing day in and day out. But I appreciate your time, Matt. And until next time, you guys have a great day.
Thanks again.